It's almost time to begin, so make sure you have out your number 2 pencil. You will have 1 hour to finish this test. Intelligence has been something that we've been really curious about since the beginning of psychology. But the question's always been, how do you measure something like intelligence? See, the problem with measuring intelligence is that it's a construct. And a construct, that's just like this abstract, intangible quality of a person that cannot be directly measured. Like, just what I mean is, if you want to measure your height, you just, put a ruler up to you. If you want to measure your weight, you stand on a scale. But we don't have anything that can directly measure intelligence like that. I can't just put a ruler up to your head, and that's not going to tell me anything. I have to instead, whenever I want to measure a construct like intelligence, what I need to do is I need to operationalize intelligence. So that's taking this, when you operationalize something, you take this abstract quality and you associate it with something that is observable, something that actually is measurable. So an operational definition, that's just like detailed instructions on what behavior you're going to associate with this construct and how you're going to measure that behavior. So when it comes to measuring intelligence, the behavior that we associate with this construct of intelligence is your performance on an intelligence test. So that performance is usually described in terms of a single score or a series of scores that we call your intelligence quotient, your IQ. And I'll talk in more detail about IQ in the next video. But the thing about these tests, and most tests, is that they have to be both reliable and valid. So reliability, that's just the ability for the test to yield consistent results. So just as an example of something high in reliability would be a bathroom scale. You step on the bathroom scale and it'll tell you how much you weigh. If you step off and you step back on again, it should give you the exact same measurement. So that just means it's a very reliable device. So you would hope that your intelligence test could be as reliable as a bathroom scale. The other quality is validity. So validity just means that the test is measuring what it claims to measure. So you would want your intelligence test to be only measuring this concept of intelligence and nothing else, like wisdom or emotions or anything like that. So you hope that the test is very accurate in what it's trying to measure. Now, there's a bunch of different kinds of tests out there. You have, first of all, achievement tests. So achievement tests are the kinds of things that you're going to see in a college classroom or high school or elementary or whatever. These are tests that are given by the instructor to measure the knowledge and skills that a person has acquired through the educational experience. So the thing about these achievement tests is that they might measure a certain aspect of intelligence, but it's more so just about your understanding of the course material. So if you do perform poorly on, like the next test, for example, I wouldn't take it too personally. I don't think that that really has much to say about your intelligence. It's more so your performance on the tests in whichever course. That more so has to do with your just understanding of the material for that course. But if you actually want to measure intelligence, if you want to directly look at this quality, this construct, what you're going to need to do is more along the lines of an aptitude test. So an aptitude test will measure your ability to learn. With aptitude tests, you'll need a certain level of knowledge, but that's not really what they're testing. They're testing your ability to learn new things. So there's many different kinds of aptitude tests out there. You have special aptitude tests, which measure your ability to succeed in a single area. Then you have multiple aptitude tests, like the SAT or the ACT, that measure your ability to, perform well on many different kinds of areas. But the one we're most interested in are the general intelligence tests that assess a wide variety of abilities. And when it comes to these intelligence tests, the one that is most popular, most mainstream, especially in this country, would be the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale, 5th edition, or SB5. Now, the SB5, it doesn't look like an achievement test. It doesn't look like a test, really. It more so looks like a series of little puzzles or like a series of little games. Because remember, what we're trying to measure here isn't your knowledge of something. So I can't really just ask you a series of multiple choice questions. Instead, I need to see if you can solve problems and adapt and learn. So the best way to do that is through the use of, actual, like, physical puzzles. Now, here's just a few examples of questions that you might see on the SB5. And since we're doing this, through a video, I can't really, pull out these puzzles and give them to you. Instead, we're just going to have to try to convert some of these puzzles into a format that will work through the video. So here's question number 1. The question is, which of the answers on the right fits the missing space to complete this pattern? Now, you're not only being measured on whether or not you can get the answer right, you're also being timed. So try to get that answer as quick as you can. All right, did you pick number 5? Number 5 is the right answer. Now here's question number 2. Which of these 5 is least like the other 4? Bear, snake, cow, dog, or tiger? Alright, if you picked snake, that's probably because it's the only one that's a reptile. It's the only one that's cold-blooded. It has no legs, and so on. And then here's question 3. Which of the 5 makes the best comparison? So milk is to glass as letter is to blank. So stamp, pen, envelope, book, or mail. For this question, envelope would be the right answer because you can put milk in glass and you can put a letter in an envelope. And yeah, I know you can put a letter in all kinds of things. Like you can put a letter in the mail, you can put a letter in a book, whatever. But the primary, container for something like milk would be a glass, and the main container for something like a letter would be an envelope. So that makes the best comparison. So obviously many of these Stanford-Binet questions do require a certain level of knowledge, but that's not really what they're testing here. They're more so just testing your ability to, adapt. That's definitely evident with question number 4. So with question number 4, you need to try to explain the difference between misery and poverty. So there's obviously many differences here, but just explain one of the major differences. So here's one. Misery is a state of mind marked by deep depression, while poverty is a physical lack of resource or opportunity. Now here's question 5, and this question is interesting because it was actually demonstrated in a major motion picture. So in Die Hard 3, we had Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis solve this problem. So if you remember that scene, then sorry, this question's not going to be very good for you. But if you haven't seen the movie, or if you just don't remember that scene, see if you can figure this out. So this is more of like a puzzle. Now here's the question. How can you measure exactly 4 pints of water by using only a 5-pint can and a 3-pint can? Let's pretend you're Bruce Willis, and if you just try to approximate, then the bomb's going to be detonated. So you have to be exact. So how can you get exactly 4 pints of water using a 5-pint can and a 3-pint can? Now, if you want to take some time to think about this, just go ahead and pause the video. But remember, You're being timed. So try to solve this problem as quickly as possible. So here's the solution. Well, here's one solution. There's multiple solutions, actually. So, step 1, you fill up the 5-pint can. Step 2, you pour the water in the 5-pint can into the 3-pint. So now you have 3 pints in the 3-pint can and 2 in the 5. Now you dump out the 3-pint can. Then you pour the remaining 2 pints from the 5-pint can into the 3. So now you have 2 in the 3 and 0 in the 5-pint. Then you refill the 5. So now you have 5 in the 5 and 2 in the 3. And then you pour as much as you can from the 5 into the 3. So that will, if you do that, you'll end up with 3 in the 3 and 4 in the 5. You now have exactly 4 pints of water in the 5-pint can. So those are just a few examples of some intelligence test questions that you might see on the Stanford-Binet or one of the other intelligence tests that are out there. But the Stanford-Binet, though the most popular, isn't the only one that's used. We also have the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test 4th edition. So that would be WAIS 4 or WAIS 4. Then there's the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children 4th edition. So that would be WISC 4 or WISC 4. And just like the Stanford-Binet, these Wechsler intelligence tests yield, a single IQ score, and you can break that IQ score down into the subcomponents like verbal and nonverbal, for example. And here's just an example of a question that you might see on the WISC 4. So this is rather similar to what we were looking at before. It has to do with patterns, but they definitely have adapted this for children who tend to not know as much stuff. So which one of the options fits the pattern you see here? The correct answer would be. So now I just wanted to give you a super quick history lesson on intelligence testing. Intelligence testing came about because way back in the day, World War I kind of a time period, we wanted to try to find a way to quickly determine the qualities of the new recruits. So we wanted a more efficient way to find out if, for example, this new recruit would be a good officer or, medic or soldier or whatever. Should we give this guy a desk job or should we give this guy a rifle? So the way they developed in order to most efficiently do that is they created something called the Army Alpha. So with the Army Alpha, now you would go into a big room with a bunch of other recruits and you would be given a standardized test. And the Army Alpha was one of the first kinds of standardized tests. And based on your scores, based on your responses to this on this test, then you would be, directed towards different positions. And that seemed to be fairly efficient and fairly accurate. It really did seem to work out, but the Army Alpha had a lot of problems. It has been revised over time, and we've developed new kinds of, group intelligence tests that you have probably already taken. Some of the things that have come since then would be things like the SAT or the ACT, or maybe you've heard of the CQT. All of these are just basically the descendants of these early kinds of group intelligence tests. If you're watching this video and you're starting to wonder what your IQ score might be, how would you perform on these tests? Well, I just want to tell you that if you really want to know your IQ, you really need to get a professional to administer the test. You can't do it on the cheap. You can't do it for free. If you go online and you try to Google intelligence tests, I'm sure you'll find a lot of stuff, but the vast majority of it is total garbage. Most of the time what they're just trying to do with these unsupervised intelligence tests, intelligence tests that you can take independently, are just try to get your email or your phone number or something like that. They just want to try to get important pieces of information from you so that they can then sell it to advertisers and things like this. So it's really just a scam, is what I'm saying. Don't buy it. If you really, really want to know, then you're just going to have to hire a professional. Now, there's a couple final things I'd like to say about intelligence testing. Since we first started to administer these intelligence tests, we've noticed that large differences have been found in the average IQ between various cultures of the world. What we generally see is that in cultures that are most similar to us, so we developed a lot of these intelligence tests, so the cultures that are most similar to us tend to perform pretty good. Like we're pretty good, and any country like Australia, most of Europe, even parts of Russia, for example, they all perform fairly the same as us. But cultures that are very different from us generally aren't doing too great. So now I'm talking about things like the Middle East and especially Africa. Like majority of African cultures tend to perform much, much lower on our standardized kinds of intelligence tests. But something that's kind of interesting and kind of, unexpected is that a lot of Asian countries actually do better than us on the tests we developed. So clearly there's some important, cultural differences here, and this has led to the development of what we call culture fair testing. So these are tests that are just designed to try to minimize the importance of certain kinds of skills and knowledge that we tend to see as being a part of, our culture, but not necessarily others. Now, when you look at the different ethnic groups in our own country, you see some interesting differences. On average, Asians perform the best, followed by Caucasians, then Hispanics, then Africans. And these intelligence score differences have been pretty alarming. They've been around since, the tests were first developed, and a lot of people were asking questions as to exactly what does this mean. Does this actually mean that people of, Asian descent are just smarter than the rest of us? Or maybe people of African descent are they have inferior kind of intelligence capabilities? Well, some early researchers actually argued that point. So people back in the day, like back in the 1960s, would argue that these differences in average scores between the ethnicities, these are evidence for, their racist beliefs. And there was a lot of debate about that. But I would strongly urge you to not go down that same path, because since then, we've definitely focused on developing those culture fair tests I was just talking about. And when you make these tests less biased towards, the original creators, rich old white men, then what we find is that people who aren't rich old white men can also do fairly well on the test. So, but what was going on? Why do we see these differences in the first place? Well, the primary answer I have for you is that we generally see important kind of cultural differences. Just like different cultures tend to value different kinds of skills and life choices and things like that. Another thing is, in our own country, we tend to see these different ethnic groups as being influenced by different kind of social forces. So it shouldn't be terribly shocking if I mention that Africans in our country have kind of a troubled history. So that has definitely played a major role in their ability to perform well on these kinds of standardized tests. Specifically, what I'm trying to say is that Africans in our country, and in many countries, they tend to be of a lower socioeconomic status. So those social pressures, those financial pressures, it's a really heavy burden that they have to deal with, and as a result, they just don't generally perform as well on these kinds of tests like I said, were originally developed by rich old white men. So here's just a super quick example of what I mean by a biased question. So this biased question is something that people in our country will generally be able to answer correctly, but if you try to use this test in other countries, it's not going to work out so well. So here's the question. Which of the following is least unlike the others? You have rat, tarantula, parakeet, goldfish, and chipmunk. Did you say chipmunk? Well, if you did, that's probably because of all the animals in this list, a chipmunk is one that is generally not kept as a pet. So people have rats as pets and tarantulas and parakeets and goldfish, but you can't really domesticate a chipmunk. They're just wild animals. But the reason why this is biased is because if you live in, Japan, you might not know what a chipmunk is. You might not even know what a parakeet or a tarantula is, because these animals just don't really exist in your part of the world. And then lastly, here's a question that was much more culture fair. So now this is a question that doesn't require any kind of specialized knowledge or skill. It seems to be much more directly about intelligence. So here you see some patterns, and the problem is you need to figure out which one of these 6 options fits the pattern on the left. And that would be, of course, number 3.